Well, Ben came up with this idea to grow some wheat in a field. To be honest, I can't remember that conversation at all, but I know I was part of it, and somehow we had the foolishness and the innocence to get going on this completely potty project, which has been quite a ride. So hopefully this film will show you a little bit of this journey we've been on through the many stages, from cultivation to sowing to harvesting to storing and threshing and milling and finally baking and eating, and all of the things that we had to kind of consider in a regenerative approach to growing wheat.
Yeah, so we moved some weaners onto the half acre that we were going to plant with wheat. They basically just spent their time digging and turning the land over, but they did a really good job in about a month or two of basically making everything look like it was bare soil. So after that, it was pretty lumpy and bumpy, and we wanted a nice flat seed bed essentially. So the first thing we did was to take a disc harrow over it, and what that does is it basically just cuts up all these clods and like hills and mounds that the pigs had made and spread it out, and so it kind of looked fairly decent. And I think we then took the chain harrow over it once, just to level it out a bit more before we then broadcast the seed. So when it came time to broadcast our wheat, the way we worked it out, because obviously you've got a bucket full of seeds, or 50 kilos of seed, and you're like, how am I going to spread this out evenly across this field? So to start off with, what we did was we measured out a metre square, and we measured out the amount of seeds you would need for 1 square metre, and we spread it there so everyone could see exactly what it should look like on the ground in the end, which gives them people an idea, of what they should be aiming for. The way we did it is we split it into 4 sections. And then we had 4 people in each section, and 4 people would then so obviously we split the seed into 16 parts, and each person had a 16th to do their quarter. So the idea is then that you're ensuring that there's definitely going to be pretty spread out essentially. So each person started in the corner of their quarter. Sounds pretty convoluted, and then they walked across, walk up and down, scattering the seed as they go, and the idea being that it's going to be fairly evenly spread that way. The actual broadcasting of the seed, sowing the seed, was a real community event, so there was quite a few people came out. It's always something special when, if you're planting potatoes or onion sets or whatever. But obviously this is the first time wheat has been grown here for, I don't know, certainly since the community began. Obviously Brithdir Mawr has a history of growing cereals on this farm, but it's not been done for a long time. So it was a really special event to get, lots of people together to do that.
So we've been watching the wheat grow, and we've been advised that about the bottom sort of 2/3 or 4/5 of the wheat would become yellow, and then the top sort of 6 to 8 inches would be slightly green, and that at that point, before it's fully ripened, is when you want to harvest it. And that's because it's not being harvested by a combine harvester, which threshes as well as cuts. And that's because this is called April bearded. It's a heritage variety. It's a much longer stalk, so you get straw out of it, which can be used for thatching as well as being able to eat the grain. So it's a win-win, it's good. We had lots of people here having fun, doing the harvesting on the day. We started off with scythes. We made a mess. We thought this was going to be impossible. A lovely guy who's been helping us got his reaper binder and began to cut the wheat with that. But halfway through, it broke. So we found ourselves thinking, oh my God, we're going to have to do this by hand, and this is going to be really, really difficult. But thankfully, what I found as I scythed, if I just scythed one cut, stopped there, and took that bundle of wheat that was left on the grass, it was easy to then not create a mess and build up a pile that would form a sheaf. And left those for about 10 days. We actually harvested it in two different stages because it wasn't fully ripe along that back fence because it had been in the shade of the oak trees. And once that's done, you store it in a rick. You bring all those sheaths and you create sort of concentric circles and build up this rick with the sheaths sloping downwards so that when you put a tarp over the top, the water runs off. Built the rick where it's now stored, which it can remain there for a couple, 2 or 3 months if we wanted it to, before threshing. So we harvested all the wheat, and it was in stooks to finish off that kind of drying process when it wasn't fully ripe, and then it was put into a rick. It stayed in the rick for quite a long time, and finally we were able to thresh the grain and winnow the grain, clean it as much as we could, and put it in Hessian sacks. And we strung it up and hung it from the rafters in the roof in the attic space of the big house at Brithdir. I brought a sack here to Emma at the mill, Evelyn in St Dogmiles, and for her to use her moisture meter to test its moisture level, and it turned out that it was too damp. It was 16% moisture level. We had to get it down to between 12 and 13. Took the wheat away, hung up all the sacks from the rafters, this time in Heather and George's house, and brought in lots of firewood, and they got their fire going. And I checked the moisture level after about a week, and it had come right down, and by the time we'd finished it was down to about 12.5. So I was able to then contact Emma, say, okay, our grain's all ready to go. When we arrived, Emma invited us to go round to the back of the mill, and then she reappeared, opened a sluice gate, water from the pond at the back here came through and onto the wheel. The wheel began to turn, which was quite a magical moment, and we all then trooped inside and saw the workings of the cogs and the stones turning and the grain gradually moving down in between the stones and being ground to flour. Down here on the ground floor, there's about 2 floors above this. It's coming out this tiny chute into a kind of trough where she began to pack it into the bags. So it's an absolutely beautiful place. It feels like stepping into another world and an older part of our history, which feels really nourishing. Just feels wholly good and much like our flour. no idea about when you're growing cereals, each of which pose their own challenges. However, today we got there and we created flour, which was an incredible high, really. It was a really lovely moment of a project fulfilled and a kind of excitement and anticipation of doing something that had just meaning, real meaning for us all. And the point of this, apart from to grow food for ourselves to eat, which is what Brithdir does a lot of, was to begin an approach to regenerative farming with cereals. And so we haven't cultivated with a plough, and this coming year we are growing a cover crop of clover, and so we're not ploughing again. We're not ploughing, and from here on in, once that clover is established, it will never need ploughing ever again. Any kind of cultivation, not with pigs or ploughs or anything. We are just going to be casting seed into clover, and that is going to be super beneficial for soil health, because we're not going to be breaking up the mycelium networks. You're going to have all the microbiome really established, getting nutrients from the sand and the stone within the soils and making those available to the plants. And the plants will give the carbohydrates, the sugars back to all that microbiology via the mycelium. And slowly but surely the soil is going to build, and that is the process of sequestering carbon. And not only that, it makes it much more porous and able to hold water. It's going to be able to hold. So if there are periods where there is long periods of sunshine and less water in the future, it makes a much more resilient soil. So it's really a kind of healing of the land, healing of the soil through growing our own food, which is a win-win. And it's an exploration and an adventure into regenerative farming and a solution to global warming, in effect.